I knew the knife was coming the moment he smiled. You can always tell when a man's about to screw you over by the way he shows all his teeth, especially the ones who wear Patagonia vests indoors and end their sentences with "just to level set." This one, Director Mitchell, had the smile of a man who thought firing me in front of the team made him look powerful, like a corporate Caesar giving a thumbs down while sipping almond milk. "You've done great work," he said, loud enough for the interns to hear, "but the system runs itself now. We're moving into a lighter model, efficiency first." Then he nodded toward the door, and sure enough, there was Dan from security, pretending not to make eye contact while he hovered like a Roomba with a badge. I didn't fight. I didn't flinch. I logged out of my terminal with slow precision, like brushing teeth after a funeral. My screens dimmed. The heartbeat of the grid faded from green to gray. I stood, picked up my notebook, black, worn, pages tagged with heat load thresholds and emergency failover codes, and said, flat as burnt toast, "Might want to keep an eye on 617 tonight. First heat wave of the season." He chuckled. That smug, managerial chuckle people use when they think you're bluffing, but don't have the nerve to say it out loud. As I walked past the console, I saw the dashboard still blinking with load curve projections. Top right corner. Today, summer load test, 6 p.m. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and thought it didn't matter. Hey, before I go further, real quick, 97% of you listening haven't hit that subscribe button. If you're into stories where the people who get underestimated flip the script, show some love, subscribe, hit like. It means a lot to the team that helps bring these to life. All right, let's get back to the moment I got walked out of the room I built. See? Here's what they didn't understand. Power grids aren't like apps. You don't optimize a substation with a Jira ticket and a pep talk. You don't silence alert systems that have been built over a decade because some consultant in boat shoes says it's too noisy. And you damn sure don't fire the person who remembers why every manual override was written in the first place. But that's what they did. They called it a strategic reduction, like I was some line item on a spreadsheet making things too ugly for the next quarterly review. I had 3 certifications no one else in the room could spell, let alone pass. I wrote the emergency response script they used in the last polar vortex. I was the last person who knew how to reroute power without tripping the cascade algorithm, and they cut me loose for optics. On my desk calendar, the one they'd probably toss in the trash, I'd circled today's date in red. Next to it, I'd written one line, "Peak simulation, summer surge test, 6 p.m. That wasn't just a drill. It was a real, scheduled heat spike. The first 98-degree day of the year, the kind that makes compressors hum like dying animals and grid draw tick up like a slot machine from hell. They didn't cancel the test. They didn't postpone the heat. They just removed the person who knew what to do when the system hiccuped and turned that hiccup into a hemorrhage. And I didn't protest. That's the part that'll haunt them later. Not the fact that I didn't beg to stay, but that I smiled. Because deep in that smile was a very quiet clock. Already ticking towards 6:17 p.m., I watched from a coffee shop 3 blocks away, sipping something burnt and bitter enough to match my mood. Through the corner of my laptop screen, the grid's public dashboard streamed like a slow-motion train wreck. Only the engineers didn't know they were the ones standing on the tracks. The new efficiency team was already drunk on dashboards and buzzwords. 6 of them, all mid-30s, all dressed like they wandered in from a fintech startup. One had a sticker on his MacBook that said disrupt. Another used the word gamify, unironically, during a load curve discussion. I knew half their names, none of their credentials. Mitchell had fast-tracked them in through some partnership with a consultancy firm I wouldn't trust to program a microwave. At 1:22 p.m., they toggled auto-threshold management on the live environment. Just like that. No simulation, no buffer, no peer review. They wanted to test its resilience under dynamic pressure, which is code for, we're bored and want to break something shiny so we can feel important fixing it. They didn't check the real-time usage deltas. They didn't ask why the manual tiered response triggers existed in the first place. And they definitely didn't notice when they wiped a script from my folder labeled manual load shedding tiered response. Not deprecated, not obsolete, just old enough that none of them bothered to read the notes embedded 3 layers deep in the code. I had a copy, of course. Not on my work drive, that was company property, but I'd printed it. not even digital, just black ink on paper, folded into the back of my planner. There's something beautiful about things they can't Control plus Z their way out of. One of them, Zach, I think, with the novelty socks and the personality of a yogurt lid, actually laughed when the alert system pinged a mid-level anomaly from the Northern District's transformer ring. Legacy noise, he said, clicking it off like swatting a mosquito. This is why we streamline. I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because this was exactly the kind of arrogance that never learns until it's sweating in the dark, holding a flashlight and wondering where the hell the backup logs went. At 2:30, they began optimizing the baseline triggers, which meant flattening every escalation protocol that used to activate during the first 10 minutes of peak surge. They pushed the thresholds up by 7% across the board. Why? Too many false positives, someone said. Too many false positives. That's how they justified erasing a decade of real-time fail-safe tuning. I refreshed my screen. My name was gone from the custodian log, but the system hadn't flushed me from the API cache yet. I could still view the changes as a guest, time-stamped and unedited. Their fingerprints were everywhere, so were mine, buried deeper. What they didn't know, and never bothered to ask, was that I built redundancy the same way old-school coders left backdoors, subtle, boring, forgettable until you really needed it. A comment tag here, a ghost protocol logged in a sandbox there, nothing that would stop them, but enough to leave footprints, enough to show who had shut the doors, and who forgot to check for windows. At 3:17 p.m., I saw them disable the rolling demand forecaster for the metro zone. Not enough engagement, one said, as if the grid were a TikTok feed. Outside, the heat started pressing in, slow and heavy, like a hand around the city's throat. The air shimmered. The streets buzzed faintly with compressor hum. Inside that gleaming new control room, they were patting each other on the back for shaving off 0.3 seconds from load distribution latency. I closed my laptop and walked to the window. I knew what was coming. I'd seen it before, in 2012, when New York's grid buckled under a July spike and the systems cracked like old bone. I was part of the team that kept the East River substation from frying the whole borough. I remembered the smell. They didn't, but they would. At 5:45 p.m., I sat on my porch with a chipped mug of chamomile and watched the neighbor's dog try to eat a plastic flamingo. That stupid bird had more awareness of consequences than the clowns now running the control center. I wasn't logged into anything. No dashboards, no admin consoles, no backdoors. That would have been unethical, illegal, and frankly, too merciful. They'd yanked my credentials by 3 p.m. Sharp, just like they were trained. Clean cut, no trace. They thought it meant I was out. But here's the thing about systems. Just because you delete the hand doesn't mean the fingerprint goes with it. Before I left, I wrote one final script. Not an override, not a trigger, not even a failsafe. Just a watcher. Timed, passive, invisible unless you knew the exact variable call buried under 6 levels of nested logs. It lived in a folder they didn't even know existed, because I created it before we ever had naming conventions. I named it like a joke only I would find funny. Watchdog 617.log. It wasn't coded to save them. It wasn't coded to do anything but observe. Log start time, monitor total draw, timestamp deviation events, and if grid pull exceeded 88% for more than 60 seconds without an escalation signal, send a single ping to the last operator of record's backup line. That line was still registered to me. I didn't sit there with bated breath. I didn't even check the time. I just watched the shadows on the driveway stretch like rubber bands, listened to the compressors across the block start humming in unison, air conditioners kicking on like synchronized swimmers in a slow, boiling pool. My phone sat on the table, screen down, silent. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about vindication. It was about truth. Because truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs a timestamp. They'd stripped the system down to raw bone, scraped off protocols I wrote during hurricanes, blackouts, fire seasons. They called it bloated. I called it earned. Every escalation layer had been tested live. Every delay interval was based on a lesson, a mistake, a near miss that didn't go public because we fixed it before the headlines caught up. I sipped my tea and thought about 2017 when the Western Ring nearly collapsed during a heat burst. A bird nested on a critical relay line and threw off a whole corridor's amperage. We caught it within 3 minutes. I stayed awake for 42 hours straight, managing the failsafe sequence until the weather broke. No one remembers the ones we save, only the ones we lose. Inside the control center, they were probably checking Slack threads, watching their own graphs flatten into false security, still giddy on that startup high. They'd flipped all the toggles, killed the legacy alerts, turned the predictive threshold manager into an adaptive neural net that didn't know what to do with real-time chaos. At 6:01, the clouds burned orange. Heat shimmered on the sidewalk like a mirage from hell. Somewhere downtown, 400,000 BTUs of rooftop units were gearing up for battle, the kind of draw that separates theorists from operators, models from memories. I leaned back, closed my eyes. I didn't sabotage the grid. I didn't touch a thing. I left the door open, turned off the porch light, and let entropy do what it does best: find the cracks in our arrogance. Somewhere, buried inside a shell instance tied to the legacy operator class, a little script blinked to life. It didn't shout. It didn't scream. It just waited, quietly, for the moment they crossed the line. And then it would whisper. Just once. At exactly 6:17 p.m., the city inhaled. It was that kind of heat, the kind that sits on your chest and dares you to breathe wrong. Asphalt oozed. Power lines sang like angry bees. And across every suburb from Ridgeview to Pine Hollow, thermostats hit their breaking point and started screaming for relief. Central air units spun up like jet engines. Old wall units clunked to life with a cough. Window-mounted boxes from the 90s rattled like death traps possessed by ghosts of bad wiring decisions. In the grid logs, what was left of them, the slope started to curve. Up, the draw hit 82%, then 85%, then 88%. It ticked over like a heartbeat on meth. Inside the sleek new control center with its faux Scandinavian chairs and glowing mission statements, Director Mitchell was still mid-presentation. Something about predictive optimization through flattened protocol layering. I know because I later read the transcript. He was using phrases like redefining proactive automation, while the lights around him began to flicker like cheap Christmas decorations. The cascade began at 6:18 p.m. Load, 92%, the grid's smart prediction. AI didn't even blink. Why would it? The thresholds had been widened to allow for elastic variance. No trigger fired, no manual flags. The auto balancer, which used to throttle specific substations in tiered priority, was no longer there. Zach and the rest of his SOC squad had scrapped it in favor of autonomous demand fluidity, which translated meant, let's hope the machine guesses right. It didn't. At 6:18:17, a secondary surge from the southwest corridor, mainly residential, 2 new commercial plazas, pushed the draw into red, 92.7%, then 93.4%, no alert, no intervention. The screen dimmed once, then darkened. The first substation blinked out near Hollow Creek, then 3 more up the Beltline. In homes across the valley, lights flickered, TVs snapped off. Fridges hummed and stalled. For a brief second, it was like someone had taken a bite out of the sun. And then came the silence. Not the peaceful kind, not even the eerie post-storm quiet. This was surgical silence, the sound of systems dying in perfect sync. At 6:18:43, the state's emergency portal, an old hardened system built back in 2008 after the Big Freeze, began flashing amber on every agency's console. Grid instability detected. Region 7, 8, 10, no response trigger found. No logs, no tracebacks, no escalation routing. Because escalation had been deleted. Because oversight was legacy. Because no one thought the sun would test them so soon. Somewhere in the middle of all this, in a utility closet inside a middle school converted to a relief center last year, a backup generator coughed and failed to start. Not faulty, just out of fuel. Procurement had delayed the refill twice this month due to reallocation. Mitchell's meeting stopped mid-sentence when the projector died. The room blinked. He looked up, no longer saying optimize, just what the hell. And in that moment, sitting in my own dark kitchen, tea now cold, I felt nothing. Not relief, not triumph, not even anger. Just the confirmation of gravity. You can yell at gravity all you want. Doesn't change the fall. On the far edge of the city, a little script kept watching. Ticking. Counting the seconds since the draw crossed 88% with no response. At 6:19:02, it sent one ping. At 6:19 p.m., in a federal facility 4 states away, buried beneath 6 floors of concrete and a firewall architecture no intern could diagram, a status light turned red, not blinking, not pulsing, just red. The monitoring node wasn't designed to panic. It wasn't built for drama. It was built to do one thing: track grid integrity across multi-state regions during peak stress scenarios. And it had just picked up an anomaly. Not a voltage surge, not a transformer spike, an absence. An entire sector failed to respond to a priority 3 deviation. The system filed a high priority exception packet and queued an operator contact protocol. It pinged the last known custodian with Tier 3 manual escalation authority. That name was still mine. Not Mitchell, not Zach. Not any of the clean-shaven, agile thinkers they'd shoved into chairs after gutting my department. Me. Because somewhere in the bloated intestines of the compliance backend, they'd never submitted Form 41B, the one that officially reassigns escalation privileges to a new custodian. Probably forgot. Or didn't realize what it meant. Or maybe they assumed the system updated itself, the way everything else did. It didn't. The call went first to Mitchell's personal line. No answer. He was probably in the stairwell, cursing the dead elevators, still clutching his tablet like it might light the way out. The system pinged again, this time to the backup contact on file, the number they had on record since 2014. Mine. It rang twice. I picked up. "This is Langley," I said, calm, not smug, just present. A pause. The line crackled. Then a voice. Female, clipped, trained in urgency, cut through. "Can you confirm grid awareness for Region 7? I didn't ask who she was. She didn't ask why I was no longer in the ops room. We both knew that didn't matter right now. "Yes," I said. "I see the draw." "Are you observing active escalation protocols?" "No," I replied. "Escalation appears to have been disabled. No Tier 2 response engaged. No load shedding sequence active." She was quiet a beat longer than protocol allowed. "Noted," she said. "We're initiating a formal inquiry. Stand by for authority confirmation." I could practically hear the keyboards clattering in the background, the data trails being unearthed, the slow spread of realization crawling across terminals like a fungus in sterile soil. In DC, a compliance lead opened a folder labeled Custodial Control Transition Audit, pending sign-off. Inside was a single sheet with a red line through the reassignment field. Blank. Mitchell's name had been penciled in. Not inked, not countersigned, not submitted. Penciled. Which meant, according to the Federal Power Continuity Directive, Article 7, I was still the escalation authority. I was still the one they'd need to answer to. I set the phone down on speaker and walked to the fridge. No need to gloat. No need to run victory laps around my kitchen. Because in less than 20 minutes, someone in a blue suit would ask the question that mattered more than any glowing dashboard or AI simulation. Who deleted the failsafes? And why wasn't the custodian notified? And on that answer, everything was about to pivot. And by 6:32 p.m., half the state had gone black like someone dropped a curtain across the map. The northern grid dropped first. Strip malls, mid-rise apartments, 2 hospitals now running on backup diesel they'd last tested during a fire drill in March. The coastal sectors blinked out next. A whole loop of substations along the river tripped in cascade because their load balancing script had been flagged deprecated 3 days ago by a contractor who spelled kilowatt with a C. Power wasn't just gone. It was missing, like it had been ghosted by the very system meant to manage it. And still, no official statement, no press alert, no coordinated emergency dispatch, just a slurry of confused mayors calling the state agency while trying to reboot their own office lights. At 6:37, a pediatric ICU in the Central District began transferring patients. Their generators were holding, but just barely. AC was rationed. One of the nurses tweeted, "Don't tell me about optimization if you can't keep babies cool." At 6:40, the real call happened. It came into the agency's regional oversight office, patched straight to the operations war room, recorded, time-stamped, and flagged as high-priority inquiry from the Department of Energy. A woman's voice, steady and surgical, asked the one question nobody wanted to hear on a recorded line. Who signed off on the deletion of the fallback protocol? It landed like a depth charge. There was a pause, brief but cavernous. No one spoke. Not Mitchell. Not his junior ops chief, who was currently scrolling through logs he barely understood. Not the compliance liaison, who was flipping through a binder that still had my handwriting in the margins. Just silence. Then the shuffling. Paper. Clicking. That telltale thrum of 1,000-yard stare hitting its first wall. Someone whispered off mic, "Check the CMS archive. Look for revision logs. Where's the deletion memo?" But there wasn't one. No countersignature, no timestamp from the board, no email thread, no recorded session. Just a back-end commit logged on a Sunday night 3 weeks prior from an admin credential that belonged to a temp account, probably set up for Zach to experiment with sandbox configs. A deletion tag. One line. No rollback, no clone, no redundancy. They'd nuked the last protocol designed to reroute load manually during grid overstress, and done it without a paper trail. Because who needs process when you've got a Slack channel and a culture of trust? Meanwhile, I sat at my kitchen table, phone still on speaker, listening to the dead air fill with panic someone was trying to mute. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I didn't have to, because the system was already speaking for me. Every dark intersection, every overheating ER, every city hall desk lamp that refused to flicker back to life was proof I had nothing left to explain. By 6:43, the agency officially called for a Level 3 incident review. That's government speak for someone's about to lose their job, their clearance, or both. By 6:45, Mitchell was finally pulled from whatever closet or stairwell he'd been hiding in and asked, on camera, if he had authorized the protocol removal. He said, "We were simplifying redundant systems." No one laughed, because the only thing redundant now was the power. And the silence that followed, that was the sound of careers evaporating in real time. At 8:09 a.m. sharp, she walked in like a scalpel. Not a shout, not a bang, just heels on tile and the slow exhale of an automatic door opening into the grave they'd been digging for the last 24 hours. She wore a plain navy suit, no makeup, and an expression like gravity. Unimpressed, inevitable. She didn't introduce herself to reception. She didn't need to. When a federal regulator walks into a control center carrying a hard copy file folder, you don't ask for credentials. You clear a path. The same security guard who'd escorted me out yesterday was now holding the door open like it was communion. He didn't make eye contact. Just stepped aside, silently rewriting his career decisions one awkward breath at a time. She crossed the floor, bypassed the ops pit, and laid the file flat on the glass conference table where Mitchell sat pale, rumpled, and suddenly very, very quiet. His laptop was open, but he wasn't typing, just staring at the login screen like maybe it would forgive him. "Continuity escalation, custodian clearance log," she read aloud, sliding the folder across. He glanced at the cover, didn't touch it. She opened to the flagged page and tapped the highlighted line with one red-tipped fingernail. Under the custodian status column, next to my name, resignation not recorded, authority active. A whisper passed through the room like a virus. No one said it out loud, but it rippled in expressions, in the tiny shifts of posture and breath. She still had authority. We never removed her. She warned us, and we didn't listen. Mitchell blinked, mouth opened, closed. "According to Form 41B," she continued, voice flat, "all Tier 3 override custodian transitions must be signed by both the outgoing custodian and a board officer, then registered in the continuity escalation ledger within 48 hours of operational change." She paused. No one interrupted. "This form," she said, "was never submitted, and no record exists of any board review for control schema modifications or protocol deletions dated in the last 60 days. Someone at the back of the room quietly slid their chair away from the table. She reached into the file again and produced a fresh system printout from their own core logs, dated 6:52 a.m. that morning. The header read, "Control Access Status Report, Custodian Override Node." Underneath, A single line printed in blunt monospace font. Manual override orphaned, authority unresolved, escalation path null. Mitchell cleared his throat finally. We assumed the handoff was processed. It was verbalized during transition week. We assigned the control schema to the DevOps queue. She didn't blink. There is no such thing as a verbalized custodian transition, she said. Then, who approved deletion of the fallback protocol? Dead silence. Again. At 8:17 a.m., the regulator requested a board emergency session, not for updates, not for optics, but for accountability, because the system didn't just fail, it did exactly what it was told, and what it was told was chaos. By 8:30, an emergency call had been placed to my number. I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because when your house burns down after you replace the fire alarms with mood lighting, you don't get to ask the former fire marshal to come put it out, not without reading the paperwork first. I walked back into that building the next morning through the same door they'd pushed me out of 48 hours prior. No escort this time. No badge check. The guard from Monday glanced up from his tablet, saw my face, and just nodded like he was relieved someone had returned who actually knew how the lights were supposed to stay on. The lobby smelled like sweat and printer toner. Half the screens in the ops bay were still dark, flickering with static error prompts the new team couldn't decode without Google and shame. One of them was on the phone with a vendor, nearly in tears, trying to explain that no, they didn't have the rollback hashes because someone archived the snapshot folder to free up space. I didn't stop to look. I didn't gloat. This wasn't about rubbing their noses in the fire they lit. It was about making sure no one ever handed them matches again. The boardroom was dim. Backup power was flaking in and out, and someone had dragged in a fan that sounded like a dying chainsaw. The chairman sat at the head of the table, white-knuckled, blazer off, tie half undone. The rest of the board looked like a lineup of people who had just been told their savings were buried in a mattress they accidentally donated. I stood at the door for a moment. Nobody told me to sit. The chairman cleared his throat. "Do you, still have access?" he asked. I reached into my bag, pulled out a USB key the color of gunmetal, and set it gently on the table. "Still active," I said. No one breathed for a second. Then he leaned forward, not panicked, not demanding, just tired. "What would it take," he asked, "to secure this again?" That was the moment. Not when the grid collapsed. Not when the regulator read them their own negligence back like a bedtime story. No, this was the pivot. They weren't asking for help. They were asking for a rewrite. I sat, pulled out a single sheet of paper, 3 lines. That's all it took. 1. All override activity to be logged in immutable, third-party audited chains. 2. No protocol deletions or schema modifications without 2-tier consent. Custodian plus board ops liaison. 3. Establishment of a new department. Continuity oversight. Independent. Reporting directly to the State Compliance Board, not to the director, not to the board chair, not to anyone who signs bonuses. The chairman read it, twice. This would cut around our entire operations structure, one of the execs said, his voice brittle. "Yes," I said, "that's the point." "You want to be director?" "No," I replied. "I want you to stop appointing people who think uptime is just a KPI on a pitch deck." They didn't argue, because in the empty hum of that dying conference room, surrounded by the soot-stained bones of their own ego, they finally understood. The system doesn't care about titles. It remembers who wrote it, who tuned it, who kept it alive when the models failed and the variables lied, and it doesn't forget who deleted the things that saved it. I picked up the USB key, slid it back into my pocket. "Your move," I said. The chairman signed, quietly, like someone sealing a will. And just like that, I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was the lock, and they just handed me the only key. The hearing aired on a Wednesday, mid-morning slot, buried under a news cycle chasing a celebrity divorce and a Senate shouting match. But it didn't need prime time. The people who mattered, the regulators, the engineers, the city officials with bruised reputations and backup generators still humming in their basements, were all watching. The screen was split. One side showed a PowerPoint of the grid schematic from the night of the failure, jagged red lines marking the moment everything collapsed. The other side held a live feed of the Federal Oversight Panel, flanked by 3 state auditors and one very tired woman from the Department of Energy, who hadn't smiled once since the broadcast began. The chair read the summary aloud in the flat cadence of a woman who's read too many reports that start with preventable. System failure, initiated by unauthorized removal of the manual fallback protocol. Custodian of record not notified. Escalation procedures failed due to deleted triggers. No dual consent log filed. No board memo entered. She paused, glanced over her glasses, and continued. Root cause: negligent protocol governance and unauthorized schema alteration without compliance oversight. They didn't name names until the appendix. Then, in stark black type, it appeared on screen: Custodian Record, Tier 3 Manual Override Authority Langley, M status, reinstated under Clause 9C, Emergency Continuity Provision. 1 line, that's all. But in every room where decisions were made, that line said everything. Clause 9C wasn't a promotion. It was a correction. A binding re-entry into a system that now understood the cost of forgetting who kept it breathing when the lights were on and the storm was still miles away. Mitchell resigned 2 hours after the hearing. No statement. No media circus. Just a memo in the HR channel and a deactivated keycard before lunch. He didn't fight it. He didn't even try to spin it. There was nothing left to salvage. Zach and his team faded out like a browser tab someone forgot to close. Most of them took contract gigs somewhere else. One started a podcast, another launched a newsletter about redefining resilience in digital ecosystems. I didn't subscribe. The board didn't hold a vote. They didn't need to. The state appointed a compliance liaison to oversee every system change for the next 24 months. Continuity oversight became its own pillar, not a vanity arm, not a check-the-box title, a real division, small, quiet, untouchable. I didn't go back to my old office, they offered. I declined. Instead, I wrote the new override protocol myself, lean, transparent, brutal in its clarity, no jargon, no abstraction, just logic, and a signature at the bottom. I attend meetings now sometimes, not often, mostly to listen, sometimes to remind them that systems don't fail because they're too complex. They fail because someone believed complexity was the enemy of trust instead of its bodyguard. The grid runs, not on autopilot, not on swagger, but on rails, guarded ones. The new ops director, quiet, certified, curious, sends me reports twice a week. She reads the logs, asks questions, doesn't call legacy code cruft. I respect that. And when I walk past the wall that used to hold the glossy photo of the last director, I see something better now. A single line framed above the console I built. Automation works until the humans who understood it are treated like spare parts. I stood there once, just for a second, and let it burn into memory. Then I walked out. Lights steady, grid humming, silence earned.